On April 18, 2025, a Russian hypersonic missile struck a Ukrainian logistics hub near the Polish border, just 18 miles from NATO territory. The explosion left a crater the size of a football field, and for a few tense hours, US and NATO forces were on high alert. But it wasn't the blast that raised alarms. It was the missile debris that breached Polish airspace. That single moment didn't just escalate a war, it risked triggering Article 5 of the NATO treaty. One misstep, and the world's most powerful military alliance could be at war with Russia. And the warnings don't stop there. Leaked NATO intelligence, first reported by Der Spiegel, suggests that Russian tactical nuclear weapons are now stationed in Belarus, barely 200 kilometers from Kyiv. The Kremlin denies it, but satellite images verified by independent analysts tell a different story. Meanwhile, China, while calling for peace, has been quietly expanding weapons exports to Moscow through shadow companies in Kazakhstan. And just this week, Beijing issued a rare midnight statement blaming the West for strategic arrogance in Eastern Europe. So now the questions are impossible to ignore. Is the world sleepwalking into World War III? Has the Ukraine conflict become a smokescreen for something far more complex? And what role are billionaires, battlefront AI, black market energy deals, and economic shockwaves playing in reshaping this war into a global standoff? Stay with me, because over the next few minutes we're unpacking the battlefield moves, the disinformation operations, the energy warfare, and the terrifying new alliances that are redefining modern conflict in real time. But while Russia builds new alliances and Western aid becomes a political football, one country has stayed remarkably quiet, at least on the surface: China. Publicly, Beijing maintains it's a neutral party. Privately, it's a whole different story. According to a recent leak from Japan's defense ministry, China has ramped up its non-lethal military assistance to Russia. Night vision gear, body armor, surveillance drones, all labeled as civilian tech. And on March 28th, a convoy of Chinese cargo trucks was photographed crossing into Russia's Amur region. Their destination? A logistics hub, just 150 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. Coincidence or plausible deniability? And here's where it gets even more concerning. While all eyes are on Ukraine, China is using the distraction to tighten its grip on Taiwan. Satellite images from April 2nd show new Chinese military construction on Pingtan Island, just 125 kilometers from Taiwan's western coast. Bunkers, radar arrays, and what appears to be a launch-ready missile battery. Not a drill, not a test. It's preparation. So now the West finds itself stretched thin, two fronts, two threats, and a population that's not eager for another forever war. If you're finding this breakdown helpful, give it a quick like. It helps more people find out what's really going on behind the headlines. Now back to it. Let's talk about the markets, because the economic war is just as brutal. In April, the US Treasury officially labeled a new Chinese-Russian payment network as a systemic threat to global finance. Known as PhoenixNet, this decentralized blockchain-based system bypasses SWIFT entirely, allowing sanctioned banks to trade with one another in real time using digital tokens backed by gold reserves. Guess what happened next? Oil-rich countries in Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and even parts of Afghanistan began accepting Phoenix tokens for crude oil shipments. This isn't just a workaround, it's a full-on rebellion against US financial dominance, and now Washington is scrambling to respond. On April 7th, the US imposed secondary sanctions on 2 Kazakh banks and 1 Turkish trading house linked to PhoenixNet transactions. The result? The Turkish lira dropped 3% overnight. Kazakhstan retaliated by halting oil shipments to Chevron. That's American oil, from an American-led project, frozen, and still barely a blip on Western news. Meanwhile, global food prices are surging again, not just because of climate change, but because of deliberate sabotage. According to a report from the World Food Program, nearly 40% of Ukraine's wheat export infrastructure has been destroyed since January, mostly by Russian drone strikes on grain silos and rail hubs. But here's the twist. Russian-affiliated firms are now offering to fill the gap by increasing exports to North Africa and the Middle East at a premium. They're not just bombing the competition, they're replacing it. If that doesn't sound like economic warfare, what does? And remember the ghost fleets carrying Russian oil? Turns out many of them are now co-owned by shell companies based in, wait for it, Dubai and Singapore. These tankers don't just change flags, they change identities. One ship was tracked using 6 different names in under 2 months, registered in 3 countries, and insured by a firm in Cyprus with ties to Russian oligarchs. It's a global shell game. If you're starting to see just how tangled this web is, share this video with someone who still thinks this is just about Ukraine. Now, let's talk about escalation. Because while all this is happening in shadows and side deals, the direct military pressure is rising too. NATO has quietly begun repositioning forces across Eastern Europe. In late March, 6,000 US troops were deployed to Romania under Operation Iron Shield, part of a readiness rotation, according to the Pentagon. But satellite imagery suggests more than just exercises. We're talking Patriot missile batteries, heavy armor, and reinforced command centers. In Poland, the story's even more dramatic. On April 30th, Warsaw confirmed it had completed construction of a high-speed logistics corridor from its western bases to the Ukrainian border. The purpose? To deliver weapons and humanitarian aid faster. Unofficially, analysts believe it's a preemptive supply line in case the conflict spills westward. Even Sweden, who just joined NATO in 2024, is now talking openly about conscription. In a press conference earlier this month, Swedish PM Ingrid Lofström said, "The age of passive defense is over. We must be prepared to act." That should send a chill down your spine. Because what happens when nations start preparing not for defense, but for action? Let's not forget the Balkans. Yes, the Balkans again. Tensions between Kosovo and Serbia reignited in late March after a Serbian nationalist militia ambushed a NATO convoy outside Mitrovica. 3 peacekeepers injured, 2 vehicles destroyed. And the aftermath? Serbia began massing troops near the border. Russia called it a justified mobilization. The EU called for calm, and the US deployed an additional drone fleet to monitor the situation, one that's still flying overhead as we speak. It's like history is trying to repeat itself, and we're letting it. Everywhere you look, flashpoints are flaring. Not in one place, not over one cause, but everywhere, all at once. And the systems we've relied on for decades, the alliances, the rules, the deterrence, they're fraying. Worse, they're being tested. And here's a terrifying thought. What if they fail? If you stayed with us this far, you're already ahead of most people. But we're not done yet. We still need to talk about nuclear doctrine shifts, rogue generals, and the real probability of a sudden miscalculation that spirals out of control. So don't go anywhere. The next section is where things get really serious and, surprisingly, personal. Now let's talk about the one word nobody wants to say out loud: nukes. Because while the world debates sanctions and supply chains, something far more dangerous is shifting quietly in military doctrines across the globe. Back in January, Russia updated its nuclear doctrine. It now includes a chilling clause. The use of tactical nuclear weapons may be justified in response to large-scale conventional threats. Not nuclear threats, conventional ones. That's like putting your finger on the red button and saying, only if I really have to, and maybe I want to. And it's not just theory. Satellite data from April 10 shows Russia has moved at least 2 Iskander missile systems, both capable of delivering low-yield nuclear warheads, to the Kaliningrad exclave right between NATO members Poland and Lithuania. A warning shot? Or pre-positioning? And here's what makes it even riskier: the response time. Once a missile is launched from Kaliningrad, it can hit Berlin in under 7 minutes. 7. That's barely enough time for a push notification, let alone a response. And while most of us assume cooler heads will always prevail, what if they don't? In March, a leaked audio recording surfaced from a private meeting of German Air Force officers discussing hypothetical nuclear retaliation scenarios. The German government downplayed it, but the content, disturbing. One general speculated that in a real conflict, decisions would be made at the speed of algorithms, not diplomacy. Let that sink in. We're talking about AI-assisted warfare systems, where response decisions could be made faster than human logic can intervene. Now combine that with faulty intel, human emotion, deepfakes, or even a cyber attack misattributed to the wrong actor, and you don't need World War III to be declared. It could just happen by accident, by miscalculation, by momentum. And that's the scariest part of all. This isn't about nukes being dropped tomorrow. It's about the world inching closer to a scenario where every player feels backed into a corner. And cornered animals don't negotiate. They lash out. And if you're thinking, well, surely our leaders wouldn't let it get to that point, think again. In April, former U.S. Secretary of Defense James Mattis said in an interview with Foreign Affairs, "We are now in a time where global military escalation is not a question of if, but of how fast it will unfold once triggered." He's not talking about theory, he's talking about velocity. Speed is now the deadliest variable. So where does that leave us? On edge, but not helpless. Because the more we understand these connections, the alliances, the economics, the psychology, the history, the better chance we have of demanding better leadership, smarter diplomacy, and honest media coverage that doesn't bury real risks under celebrity gossip and social media noise. And if this video helped you see the global picture a little more clearly, hit that like button. If you think more people need to hear this, not just the headlines, but the whole tangled mess, share this with a friend or drop it in a group chat. Because the first step to avoiding disaster is knowing how close we are to it. So let's rewind. We started with a shocking but real possibility. World War III might not begin with missiles flying, but with oil ships rerouted, digital currencies weaponized, and slow-motion conflicts that quietly add up. We looked at the energy wars, the trade networks, the secret diplomacy, the false neutrality, and the terrifying reemergence of nuclear strategy. And now we end where we began, with one big uncomfortable question. If World War III has already begun, just not in the way we expected, what are we doing to stop it? Or are we already too late? Stay curious, stay skeptical, and stay informed. And if you want to keep tracking what they don't want you to notice, hit subscribe. Because in a world where silence can be deadly, knowing the truth might just be our last defense.